Amid the symphony of crackling flames and groaning metal, Evan Cross threaded his way through the wreckage of what had once been the lively Fort Emmerich. Smoke spiraled upward, blending with a sky darkened by Vorik warships and laden with the ash of obliterated buildings. Each inhale burned, but he pushed forward, eyes alert for any movement ahead. His comrade, Luke Hale, limped beside him, his left arm swathed in a makeshift bandage already soaked with blood. Luke had caught shrapnel a couple of blocks back, but they'd made a pact. No stopping, no retreating. We're nearly there, Evan stated. The command hub lies just over the next rise. If we reach it and upload this intel, it could tip the scales in command's favor. Luke let out a dry chuckle, a flicker of grim humor crossing his face. Could. Our whole strategy rests on that word. We've gambled on less, Evan replied, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. A Vorik patrol had been spotted in this sector earlier, and an unsettling feeling of being watched hung in the air. They advanced silently, sticking close to the remnants of walls and scattered rubble. Their footsteps were muffled, blending with the crackle of fires and the eerie quiet that settled between distant bursts of gunfire. Every turn might conceal an ambush. Each step felt like walking into a snare, but Evan knew that hesitation was a luxury they couldn't afford. It meant death. A flicker ahead made him freeze. He raised a clenched fist, and Luke dropped into a crouch beside him, weapon poised. See something? Luke whispered. Maybe, Evan murmured, squinting through the haze. He glimpsed a faint shimmer of something sizable. Vorik cloaking tech. He signaled for Luke to fall back, but as they moved, a sharp clicking sound pierced the air. The Vorik's call. They'd been detected. The Vorik materialized, towering and heavily armed, their cloaking devices deactivating as they brandished massive, serrated weapons. The aliens loomed over them, all sinew and armor, faces obscured by heavy plating, but eyes blazing with predatory intensity. Time to make a stand, Evan muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. Luke smirked, shifting his stance despite the searing pain in his arm. The first Vorik lunged. Evan sidestepped, unleashing a controlled burst at its legs. The shots connected, and the creature staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. Seizing the moment, Luke ducked low and swung his rifle upward, delivering a crushing blow to its exposed neck. Another Vorik charged, its massive blade slicing through the air inches from Evan's head. He dropped to one knee, firing into the alien's chest. It reeled back, emitting a guttural roar. Luke pivoted, snatching a piece of rebar from the ground and driving it into the creature's unprotected flank. They moved as one, their actions synchronized, attacks flowing seamlessly. They didn't possess the Vorik's brute strength or size, but they had coordination and an unbreakable will to survive. Another Vorik collapsed, convulsing as Evan's shots severed its spine. Luke dispatched the last one with a fierce uppercut, the impact shattering the alien's visor. Luke gasped for breath, pressing his hand against his side where blood was staining his uniform. They're getting faster, he mumbled, trying to steady his breathing. Evan wiped the sweat from his forehead, casting a quick glance around them. It doesn't matter, they're still falling, he replied. With the last Vorik silenced, Evan and Luke shared a brief, wordless nod before moving forward again. The command hub was close now, perhaps just 100 meters away. But as they advanced, a sense of unease settled in Evan's chest. They had made it this far, but how much longer could their luck hold? True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Evan's eyes shifted to the horizon, where the command hub stood like a battered fortress against the scorched skyline. Only a few blocks separated them from the building that held the intel capable of changing the tide. As they crept forward, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Did you feel that? Luke asked. Evan nodded, a sinking feeling forming in his gut. Yeah, and it's coming closer. The sound grew heavier and more deliberate, each thudding step sending vibrations through the earth. Suddenly, from behind a collapsed skyscraper, a colossal figure appeared, a Vorik war machine. The iron giant towered 2 stories high, its nearly impenetrable metal armor bristling with weapons on all sides. This wasn't just a guard, it was a moving fortress. Evan and Luke froze, instinctively ducking behind a pile of rubble. We can't just fight that thing, Luke muttered, his eyes wide. Appreciate the update, Evan shot back, his mind racing. Their weapons wouldn't even scratch that hull. One direct hit and they were finished. But we're not out of options yet. Luke glanced at him skeptically. Do you have a plan? Or are we winging it like always? A bit of both, Evan said, scanning the area. He spotted a narrow alley to their left that curved and offered some cover. We'll lure it into that alley, slow it down, then we improvise. Luke shook his head but managed a faint grin. Sounds about right. The behemoth's head rotated, its sensors locking onto them. With a deafening roar, it opened fire, heavy rounds ripping into the ground where they had just been standing. They sprinted toward the alley, Evan shouting over the explosions. Go, go! Diving behind a concrete barrier, they felt the force of the impacts shaking their cover as bullets whizzed overhead. The behemoth advanced, its footsteps causing the ground to quake. It turned, aiming its cannons, and a missile launched, obliterating a nearby wall and showering them with debris. "What's the next plan?" Luke yelled, barely dodging a falling chunk of concrete. Evan gritted his teeth, thinking quickly. "We get it closer, then try to climb on top. Maybe we can use its own weapons against it." They darted through the rubble, dodging another hail of gunfire. The behemoth lumbered after them, its sensors zeroing in on their heat signatures. Evan led Luke up a fallen section of wall, ascending higher as they tried to stay out of the machine's direct line of sight. "Ready?" Evan asked, glancing back at Luke. Luke gave a determined nod. "As ready as I'll ever be." They leaped onto the behemoth's back, scrambling to find handholds on the jutting pieces of metal. The colossal machine convulsed, trying desperately to throw them off, but they held on tightly. Scaling its metallic back, they discovered a hatch near the top, barely discernible among the layers of metal plating. Evan gripped the hatch lever and pulled, but it refused to move. "It's jammed," he muttered. Luke uttered a curse, then used his rifle as a lever, wedging it between the hatch and the frame. Together, they heaved, and with a grating metallic screech, the hatch yielded. A blast of hot air rushed out as it opened. Peering inside, they saw the behemoth's inner workings, the weapon controls, system interfaces, and the Vorik command station. Evan slipped through the opening, landing heavily on a steel walkway. Luke followed close behind, his weapon at the ready. The air was filled with the hum of power systems, the rhythmic clicks and whirs of alien machinery. "Let's find the core," Evan whispered, moving swiftly along the walkway. They reached the central chamber, where the massive energy core pulsed with an intense blue light. The controls were intricate, alien symbols flashing in an unreadable language. But understanding wasn't necessary. They were looking for anything that could disable the machine. "Think you can overload it?" Luke asked, eyeing the core with a mix of hope and urgency. Evan spotted a cluster of power nodes connected to the core, each blinking in sequence. "Only one way to find out," he replied. As he began manipulating the nodes, the behemoth's internal alarms blared, likely detecting their unauthorized presence. The entire structure shook as the core's power surged, and they knew time was running out. "Almost got it," Evan murmured, adjusting a final node. The machine's movements grew erratic, jerking and shuddering as its systems fought against the overload. With a final surge, the core detonated in a controlled explosion, sending a shockwave throughout the behemoth. His limbs twitched, then fell still. They scrambled out of the hatch just as the machine began to topple forward, crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. Dust filled the air, and for a moment, they lay there, catching their breath. "That was way too close," Luke said between gasps, a grin spreading across his face. Evan chuckled, wincing as he pushed himself to his feet. "We're not done yet. Let's keep moving. We're almost there. The command hub is just a sprint away now." Exhausted but resolute, they took off toward the command hub, knowing they'd come too far to turn back. In war, victory doesn't always go to the strongest. Sometimes it's earned by those who simply refuse to quit. Evan and Luke raced across the ravaged landscape, the command hub looming just a few hundred meters ahead. The fortress-like structure stood miraculously untouched amid the surrounding destruction. But as they neared the entrance, the ground around them erupted in a barrage of plasma fire. "Get down!" Evan shouted, pulling Luke behind a wall of debris. Vorik reinforcements had arrived. A squad of towering aliens flanked them, eyes glowing beneath heavy helmets, weapons trained on their position. Evan muttered a curse under his breath. They couldn't afford another prolonged fight, not with their objective so close. Evan cast a glance at Luke, noticing his pallid complexion and shallow breaths, blood still oozing from the makeshift bandage on his arm. "Ready for one last push?" he asked, already certain of the reply. Luke grinned through the pain. "If it gets us through those doors, I'm all in." They prepared their rifles, sharing a final nod before bursting from their cover. Plasma bolts zipped past them, scorching the air. Evan fired controlled bursts, aiming for the weak points in the Vorik armor. One alien dropped, collapsing to the ground, but more pressed forward. The duo ducked and weaved, staying low as they navigated the debris. The barrel of Evan's rifle grew hot in his grip, the recoil numbing his shoulder, yet he kept firing, each shot bringing them closer to the command hub's entrance. A Vorik soldier charged with a gleaming blade. Luke spun, wielding his rifle like a club, and swung with all his might. The blow sent the alien staggering, giving Evan just enough time to dispatch it with a swift shot to the back. The remaining Vorik hesitated, momentarily unsettled by the human's unexpected ferocity. Seizing the moment, Evan signaled to Luke, "Now, go!" They sprinted toward the command hub's doors, sliding inside just as the aliens regrouped and resumed their attack. The heavy steel doors slammed slammed shut behind them with a resonating clang, sealing out the chaos. Inside, the command hub was eerily silent, sterile lights casting elongated shadows down the corridor. Exchanging a quick glance, Evan and Luke moved forward with rifles raised. The air vibrated with the hum of generators, each step echoing in the emptiness. They navigated the winding passages, following a faint signal on Evan's wrist display. The crucial intel awaited in the main control room, if they could reach it in time. Just as they approached the final corridor, alarms blared and blast doors sealed shut before them, blocking their path. "Damn it!" Evan exclaimed, pounding his fist against the door. Luke glanced back, tension etched on his face. Any chance of a manual override? Scanning the wall, Evan spotted a small panel adorned with Vorik symbols. He grimaced. "Probably, but unless you've become a Vorik tech expert, we're stuck." Heavy footsteps echoed behind them, slow and deliberate. Turning, they found themselves face to face with a Vorik officer clad in black armor embellished with intricate insignias. In one hand, he held a massive energy blade, its edge glowing a menacing red. "Humans," the officer growled, his voice deep and distorted through his helmet's translator. "Your journey ends here." Evan tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes narrowing. "Not if we have a say in it." The officer advanced with measured steps, confidence radiating from his posture. Luke fired first, unleashing a volley of shots, but the alien moved with surprising agility, dodging each round despite his bulk. Closing the distance, the officer swung his blade in a wide arc. Evan barely evaded the strike, the blade's heat searing the edge of his uniform. He swung his rifle toward the officer's exposed side, but the alien caught the barrel and twisted, disarming him with a swift move that sent Evan stumbling backward. Luke charged forward, disregarding his injuries, and collided with the officer, knocking him off balance. They grappled fiercely, the Vorik's energy blade clashing against Luke's rifle, sparks flying with each impact. The officer's superior strength prevailed, and he hurled Luke aside, leaving him gasping for air. Seizing the moment, Evan grabbed a nearby metal pipe and lunged at the officer. He swung with all his strength, the pipe connecting with the alien's helmet. The officer staggered, momentarily stunned. Wasting no time, Evan struck again, targeting a vulnerable spot near the visor. The visor cracked under the blow, revealing the officer's cold, reptilian eyes. The Vorik snarled, regaining his footing, but before he could strike back, Luke fired a shot directly through the damaged visor. The officer froze, then collapsed, his weapon clattering to the floor. Breathing heavily, Evan and Luke leaned against the wall. Luke gave a weak thumbs up, a strained smile on his face. "That one's going in the records," he said. Evan let out a short laugh, pulling Luke back to his feet. Turning their attention to the blast door, they noticed it had partially opened, likely damaged during the skirmish. Squeezing through the gap, they entered the main control room. Monitors flickered with streams of data, and at the center stood the console they had been seeking, a secured terminal containing the crucial intel. Evan hurried to the terminal, inputting the access codes provided by command. The system whirred to life, lines of data beginning to download onto his wrist device. As they waited, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor. The Vorik reinforcements had breached the facility. "Any chance you can speed that up?" Luke muttered, gripping his rifle tightly. The download completed with a confirming beep. Evan detached the device and looked at Luke. "Got it. Now we just need to make it out alive." As they prepared to leave, Vorik soldiers burst into the room. Evan and Luke exchanged glances. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and cornered. "Looks like this is our stand," Luke said, raising his weapon. Evan nodded, a determined look in his eyes. Just then, an explosion shook the building, causing the walls to tremble. Through the settling dust, silhouettes appeared, human soldiers, reinforcements from command. Their allies stormed the room, engaging the Vorik forces. Within moments, the remaining aliens were neutralized, and members of their squad were helping Evan and Luke to safety. Emerging from the wreckage, they were met with a sky beginning to clear as sunlight pierced through the lingering smoke. Sharing a glance of weary triumph, they realized they had succeeded. The vital intel was secure, and against all odds, they had survived. Evan clapped Luke on the back. "Just another day saving the world," he quipped. Luke laughed, then winced. "Let's try not to make this a regular thing." As they moved away from the devastated cityscape, the command hub now engulfed in flames behind them, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, two soldiers who had confronted the impossible and emerged on the other side.